All right, now that we have some sounds loaded into a kit, let's discuss how we can approach setting up and making a pattern. Now, I haven't saved the kit yet, and there's a good reason for that. I'm going to get to that in a little bit because there's a certain way that I want to save it, so it'll be a lot easier for us to know the tempo of the pattern that kit is being used by. But before we get there, down here at the bottom, we have different pads that represent steps in our step sequencer. All the Elektron gear uses a step sequencer, and by default, each pad represents a 16th note, or 1/16 of a bar. So that's why we have 16 steps. Each 16 steps is a bar. And we have a page button here so that we can have up to 4 different pages of these 16 steps. Now, we can change the step length so that instead of each step representing a 16th note, it can either be longer or shorter, which will then change the length of each page worth of steps. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, if I press play, we don't hear anything because there's currently no notes entered into this pattern. Now, I want to get a sense of the tempo, and the best way to do that is to enable the metronome. We have a button here that says RTRG. This is the Retrig button, and below that it says metronome. Now, if I want to go to the metronome settings, I can hold my function button and press Retrig, because under that it says metronome. And I can activate my metronome, change the time signature, etc. The main thing I'm concerned with right now is I want to turn up the volume of this. Now, I'm not going to activate the metronome from the metronome page because there's a much easier method to do this, one that I prefer, which is to simply hold function and then hold the Retrig button until the metronome turns on. So hold function, Retrig, and there's my click. Very nice, very nice. Now, this tempo is going to be a little bit too fast for what I want to do. So I'm going to change my tempo. I have a tempo button here. If I want to tap the tempo, I can hold function and then tap the tempo button, but I prefer to dial this in like so. So, oops, my hand is blocking the screen. I'm going to go for a tempo, something like maybe 95 should be good. All right, so I got that established. Now, by default, you start off with one page of 16 steps, meaning that your pattern is 1 bar long. And also by default, all your different tracks, all the different sounds, all have the same pattern length. Now, if I want to change the settings for the pattern length, I can hold my function button and press the page button here. And now these are my settings for the pattern. So 16 out of 16 steps, and then we have a step multiplier. The step multiplier determines if each step is worth a 16th note or more or less. So if I make this 1/2, if I press play, let me go ahead and get out of this so you can see how quickly we're going through the steps. So now each step is worth half of the value that it was before. Before these were worth 16th notes, now they're worth 8th notes, which means that we're moving through the steps at half the speed. Let me function and go here again. If I make my multiplier times 2, there we go. If I press play now, you can see we're moving through the steps much more quickly. Instead of each one of these being worth a 16th note, they're now worth a 32nd note, which means that we'll move through the sequence twice as fast. So for my purposes, I'm going to keep this multiplier set to 1. And just to keep things simple, I'm going to stick with a 16-step sequence. If I wanted to make this longer, I could put my mouse under my mouse. I can put my cursor under the denominator here, and I can simply press up to jump up in increments of 16 steps. So I'm going to stick with 1616 right here. One other quick thing I'll point out though, if we go to the multiplier here, we can also change this so that we're working in more of a triplet grid. So 3/2, 3/4. You can do this to do some interesting triplets, or if you're working in a time signature more like 3/4 or 6/8, but that doesn't really apply for me here. One other thing I'll show you really quickly, and I don't really need the metronome playing for me to show you this. If I move over to the left side of the page scale mode, I can change it from normal, which means that each track is going to adhere to the same pattern length, or I can go to advanced. When I go to the advanced setting, I can change the pattern length for that particular track. And then I can also change the master pattern length. And a good thing to keep in mind is that at the end of the master length, all tracks are going to start at the beginning of their pattern, regardless of how many steps that they are. So let's say that I'm going to hold function and press up under the master length to change that in increments of 16. So let's say that my master length is 64 steps, and let's say that maybe I made my track 6 24 steps. So what will happen is that track 6 is going to repeat every 24 steps. It plays for 24 steps, starts over. It plays for another 24 and starts over. That's 48 steps. If it plays for another 24 steps, it's not going to get through that full 24 steps because that's going to go beyond the master length of 64 steps. So no matter what odd lengths that we choose for our individual tracks, each track will start over at the end of the master length. That is, of course, unless we change the master length to infinite, which I probably went the wrong direction to get to. There we go. If we choose a master length that's infinite, then we can have odd length patterns for our individual tracks, and then they'll never be forced to all start over at the same time because there is no master pattern length that they're all adhering to. So these are some good things to know that might be of use to you in the future. For now, I'm going to go for a normal pattern that is 16 steps long. My multiplier will be set to 1. All right, so now that I'm set up, let's go ahead and make a pattern.